Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and specifically today, we're going to have a look at the reorganization of the Russian military, what the Russian military could like 1 to 3 years into the future, and how this current war between Russia and Ukraine is changing the way the Russian military, again, will look in the future. And what I have in front of you is a map of Russian force dispositions, organizational structure, brigades, divisions, corps, army groups, prior to the onset of hostilities between Ukraine. And it's very interesting to hear information coming out of the Russian Ministry of Defense about what the Russian military could like in the near-term future. So at the start of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian military had essentially about 1 million personnel, quite possibly less than 1 million personnel in all components of its armed forces, which include the ground forces. That is the largest component, with an estimated number ranging from the different sources that you're looking at, from 280, 290,000 on up to 360,000 personnel. The next force or component of the Russian armed forces would be the Russian Navy, and that includes coastal defense forces and Marine Naval Infantry forces as well, which are estimated to number about 35 to 45,000 personnel. So in total, the Navy had about 150 to 160,000 personnel in the Russian Navy and the coastal defense forces, which includes the Naval Infantry. The next force, again, essentially the same size or close to the same size as the Russian Navy, is the aerospace defense forces, which includes the Russian Air Force. It includes the Russian Space Forces, Air Defense Forces, and that number is also essentially about 150 to 160,000 personnel. The next force is the VDV, or the Russian Airborne Forces. That force was estimated to be around 50,000 at the start of hostilities. Some would say a little more, some may say a little less. But those are the major components of the Russian military. And essentially, again, at the start of hostilities, you're looking at probably 1 million to under 1 million personnel in all those branches. You also have the Russian railway troops as well, and then you have other components within the Russian security apparatus, which is not included in that total number, such as the Russian National Guard, which is a sizable force in and of itself, with 300,000 plus personnel in that agency. So what is the plan for the Russian military going forward? And we've heard talk, again, out of the Russian Ministry of Defense that in just a few years' time, the normal size of the Russian armed forces would be upwards or above 1,500,000 personnel. So that's essentially an add of 500 to 600,000 personnel. And that corresponds fairly accurately to the numbers of mobilized forces we're seeing, and essentially we're seeing 2 waves of mobilizations numbering each about 300,000. So an additional 600,000 personnel being mobilized, conscripted, and or volunteering into the Russian armed forces. We think most of where we will see the additional forces is going to be with the Russian ground forces. And we'll also see the increase in the Russian Naval Infantry, and we'll also see an increase in Russian airborne forces as well. Probably not a overall large increase in the size of the Air Force or the Navy proper, but we will see, again, quite a bit of enlargement in terms of ground forces, naval infantry forces, and airborne forces. So first, with the ground forces, it's estimated that the Russians will increase the size of its ground forces by some 7 combat divisions. And what we believe is going to happen is the Russians will take existing mechanized brigades, such, for example, the 15th Mechanized Brigade. Usually these formations are 2,000 to 4,000 personnel in strength, and obviously you can see 3 mechanized battalions, 1 tank battalion, a reconnaissance battalion, 2 air defense battalions, and then other units as well. And what they're probably going to do is expand these brigades, these motorized rifle brigades, into full-strength combat divisions. So it'll be a net add of 7 Russian maneuver divisions on top of the existing Russian maneuver divisions. And some of these, or many of these, were brigades at one point and have then been transformed into larger divisional size forces, such as this unit up here. This is the 150th Mechanized Division. Pretty large division, and it was transformed essentially into multiple brigades, into one large division that had 2 mechanized regiments, 2 tank regiments, and other units as well. And again, here you can see established in 2016-17 on the basis of the former 33rd Mechanized Mountain Brigade. So the addition of 7 divisions is quite significant. And then compounding that, we believe that the Russians will reestablish a Moscow military district and a Leningrad or St. Petersburg military district up here in the northwest. We will probably see the Western military district get pushed west, probably towards Smolensk and Belarus. So we could see the Western military district again, maybe get headquartered in Western Russia or even Minsk at some point, depending on how things continue. And then with the addition of the Moscow military district, and then obviously the Leningrad or the St. Petersburg military district as well. So you'll end up getting 2 extra military districts as opposed to just the Western military district that currently exists. Next, in terms of size increase, the Russian airborne forces. Now, right now, the Russian airborne forces consist of what would be 4 understrength divisions, air assault, air mobile divisions, and 4 brigades, air assault, air mobile, airborne brigades. So a total of 8 maneuver units, and then also a special forces brigade. That is the 45th Special Forces Brigade, based just west of Moscow. So we anticipate, or what we're hearing at least, is the Russians could expand from 4 to 6 airborne divisions. Now, it's difficult to say if they're going to take and establish new airborne divisions, or they're going to expand those existing airborne brigades, or 2 of those existing airborne brigades, into divisions. Probably both. And then finally, the Russian Naval Infantry. That is going to see a sizable increase. Right now, if we go up to the north and we look at, for instance, the 61st Naval Infantry Brigade based up towards Murmansk near the Norwegian-Russian border. The 61st Naval Infantry Brigade and 4 other brigades, so a total of 5 Russian Naval Infantry Brigades, will be transformed into Russian Naval Infantry divisions. So that could double the strength or triple the strength of the Russian Naval Infantry and Coastal Defense Forces, depending on the size of these eventual divisions. Another interesting tidbit is we know also that the 200th Mechanized Brigade, this unit was mauled, or has been mauled, during the Russian-Ukrainian War, and it is currently reconstituting as we speak. But it took a lot of casualties, and the problems that the 200th faced in the ongoing war are very well documented. But they're talking about now making the 200th Arctic Brigade a full division as well. Now, in all probability, that is going to be one of those 7 brigades, those 7 motorized rifle brigades that are going to be transformed into full-on motorized rifle divisions. And we'll probably see changes and modifications to this, but in the end, probably if we fast forward 3 years from now, depending on what's happening in the world, again, the Russian ground forces will probably go from about 350,000 personnel, again, at the onset of hostilities with Ukraine, to upwards to 680 to 700, maybe even 800,000 personnel in the Russian ground forces. We'll probably see the Russian airborne forces expand upwards to 70,000 personnel. I know there were plans to do that anyway with the Russian airborne forces. And then finally, again, the coastal defense forces, which number about 30,000 personnel. And if you turn all 5 of those brigades into divisions, you're probably looking at a naval infantry and coastal defense force complement pushing well over 50, on up to 70,000 personnel as well. So quite a bit of growth in the coming years for the Russian armed forces as it continues to change and adapt to the ongoing set of circumstances that are happening because of world events. Now, obviously, that outlook could change quite a bit depending on what happens in Ukraine. There's talk of a possible Russian offensive, a large-scale operation pushing into the winter. Again, in all probability, that will happen in the summer. We here at MFAM believe that is going to happen in the summer. There may be some sort of Russian operation prior to that, but in order for a lot of these Russian units to reconstitute, it's really going to take until summer months before the Russian Army, Russian ground forces, airborne forces, naval infantry forces can take all these conscripts that are coming into the armed forces, train those forces properly, equip those forces properly, prepare those forces properly for offensive operations against the Ukrainians. So again, probably late summer. But very interesting to see how changes are taking place. We also know the even to a greater extent, the Russian military industrial complex is greatly expanding. Obviously, the Russians are going to need a ton of equipment, massive amounts of equipment, to equip all these new combat divisions that are going to be fielded. And that's going to take a lot of military production to occur. And I think at the same time, the Russians are going to have a hard look at its Air Force, its doctrine, and how it operates against opposing forces. Because obviously right now, there are significant deficiencies that have been identified in the Russian military. And one can only assume that the Russians are going to be very diligent in addressing those deficiencies. So as we watch this war continue, watch this war evolve, I think it's highly probable that things could look a lot different in terms of the effectiveness, compounding with the size of the Russian army, armed forces, going into the summer. And even more so going into winter of next year. This is going to be a process. It's not going to be an easy process, and it's going to be a very expansive process for the Russians to turn this around and eventually achieve victory in Ukraine. Can the Russians do it? Absolutely. They have the capability, and they have, more importantly, the wherewithal. So we'll continue to monitor, report, and bring you more content for your consumption. Thank you for joining us today. More to come. Have a good day, and have a very Merry Christmas. Good day, all.